Hi everyone, I want to talk about the echoing nightmares yet again and how to get the most out of them and how to make life a little bit easier in there. Here's some footage of my hardcore Marauder Demon Hunter that I use to farm these. This is the best build for this purpose and it actually goes quite smooth. It is rather easy for me to get to wave 150. I do it pretty much every single time, and this is even without augments. So if you're still in the early stages of your progression and you're still a bit under-geared and not really high paragon, then it can be a little bit tough to get to wave 150, but at the very least you can get to wave 125 with almost any build quite consistently if you use those pylons correctly. So if you see here in the top right corner, you have the map and the 4 pylons. You get the same pylons in every single run. And you typically want to press them always in the same order. So you always start roughly at wave 100 or so with the speed pylon, which will last 2 minutes of a flavor of time. So from wave 100 to the end is usually less than 2 minutes. This means that you will always have the speed pylon up towards the end. And now you can see me here, I'm progressing towards wave 116 already. And this is already getting rather close to the end with none of the other 3 pylons pressed. And this is usually also around the time when I am pressing the next pylon, which is usually the channeling pylon in my case. So I'm doing this right now at around 115 to 120. And typically you want to combine this with the power pylon so that they can use the combined boosts of speed, channeling and power to just blast down everything for a little while until you see that you're slowly getting overwhelmed. You can see here the overwhelm meter is still rather low and I'm still consistently finishing elites and finishing even the Rift Guardian that spawns at around 120 most of the time. And now you use those pylons to just clean up everything and you have to stay mobile because at wave 100 you see all these green meteors like falling down here and the molten explosions around you. They actually kind of follow you around the area. And if you just do big circles around the entire map, they will usually not really hit you and you don't even have to pay that much attention as long as you start a step around in a big circle. Obviously, you might just run up here to the top left and right into the meteor impact. This can happen if you don't pay attention at all. But usually you don't really have to keep, your entire focus on those meteors. But they are definitely the most dangerous part about this whole system. I think these molten explosions are usually bright enough to be visible and something that you can dodge even without really focusing. But those green meteor impacts are not really that visible most of the time, especially when there's a lot of enemies standing around and there's like other stuff going on from elites. The monsters themselves don't actually hurt all that much if you don't have like a full glass cannon build. In my case with the Marauder Demon Hunter, I think I have something like 600 million toughness with all buffs up with Vengeance and Wrath of Clarity and all that stuff. So it's not really crazy, but it is definitely fine to survive a few hits for most enemies. And with the speed pylon, I can stay at range, I can stutter step around, and I almost never get hit. Those meteors, on the other hand, they hit like a truck and they pretty much one-shot most people, regardless of how much toughness you have. So I don't know exactly how they work. They are supposed to deal physical damage, and I have been trying out the Mara's Kaleidoscope, and it seems like they still do damage to me, so this poison immunity doesn't work. But the interesting part about this is that it doesn't matter how much toughness I have, I always take roughly like 80% or so of my life in damage when I get hit by a meteor. So in fact, I can take a meteor hit and survive without proccing, just press the potion and I'm back to full HP. I'm not really 100% sure why that is, but this is what's happening. And even if I increase my toughness by a factor of 100 or so, I made a setup where I have like 50 billion toughness and I still take insane amounts of damage, but I don't die one shot. So I'm not exactly sure what's going on there, but they seem to have some kind of percentage-based damage type that always deals the same amount to you, regardless of how much toughness, how much life you actually have. Which means that when you make a tanky character, the meteors are definitely the #1 priority to pay attention to. Now to get back to those pylons, the last pylon you click is the conduit pylon. And you see here in my case, I click it at around wave 130, but this depends a little bit on how fast you get overwhelmed. You see it's already at 50% overwhelm, but we still have the other pylons up as well. So I can use my own character's power with the power pylon and the speed and such to actually blast down trash while also conduiting stuff around me. And like this, you will immediately decrease the overall meter. But towards these later waves, it will get really tough to actually finish anything. And you have to really make sure that you use this conduit well to stand as much in the middle as possible or run circles, through the middle. And also make sure you get rid of those hellish machinations that spawn lunatics. Because if you don't do that, you will get overwhelmed extremely fast, because those extra lunatics just count as extra enemies and you have no chance to even conduit them down. You always have to prioritize these things, so you have to keep an eye around the arena. They usually spawn somewhere outside or in the corner, and you do like big circles and just try to zap them down with like 2 or 3 conduit hits. Now another thing that they saw me doing here is the gear swap. You can actually change items in Echoing Nightmare, and this is something that I've tried briefly. I didn't really stick to it because for me it's not an issue, but I just wanted to kind of like do this like proof of concept, and this is also this 50 billion toughness setup that I just mentioned. So here I equipped Stone Gauntlets, Gakilla, the Mara's Kaleidoscope, Unity and the Elusive Ring, and suddenly I was a tank that is literally invincible, but those meteors apparently still hit like a truck. So you can basically just do this, equip all the toughness in the world, and you can stand in the middle with your conduit pylon and just zap stuff down without really worrying about anything besides the meteors. If you want to try this out for yourself, if you feel scared, maybe on hardcore, you can actually do this, and there's almost no chance that you're gonna die because of all this extra toughness. You can also have defensive legendary gems of Mutilation, Ezo, and Molten Wildebeest. Now one other trick that you can also use for your Echoing Nightmare runs is Shrines. So they actually carry from outside into the Echoing Nightmare, and if you have a bunch of leftover bovine bardages, for example, you can just open up a cow level. You get all 5 shrines in there. So there's Fleeting, there's Empower, there's Frenzy and Protection Shrine. And they actually help quite a lot on many builds because you have more resources, more cooldown, you're just a bit stronger in general. So you can just go through the cow level with Gloss of Worship on the follower. You have 10-minute shrines, which is definitely enough for like 3 to 4 runs. And it just makes your life easier. Because those keys drop quite rarely, it is actually not even that hard to stack up a bunch of these cow levels and just go through them once, do your runs, maybe repeat if you have more keys, and it definitely helps out. I tried it out once. Again, for me it wasn't really necessary. I just wanted to do this as like a bit of a proof of concept and see how much it actually does. And once you go into the Echoing Nightmare, you can see here I still have the 4 shrine buffs, and they stay active, and it just becomes a bit more of a breeze than it was before for me. Last but not least, I want to talk about the Bandit Shrines that spawn in the later waves. So in case you haven't noticed yet, you will get Bandit Shrines at roughly wave 120 to roughly wave 145. And if you click them in time, you have like, 10 seconds or so maybe before they disappear. You get lots of extra loot, lots of golems, as you can see here. And this is actually quite impactful to get extra value and extra loot out of this whole game mode. So it's a bit messy on the screen now, but you can see here in the top right that there is the Bandit Shrine. And if you keep an eye on the map in those waves around 120 and higher, you will usually get one of these Bandit Shrines. So they seem to spawn something like 90% of the time. I think in fact they spawn 100% of the time as long as you don't skip waves. So it seems like if you kill stuff too fast because you're too powerful, or you get like some lucky wave that just gets blasted when you have all those pylons, it might happen that you can skip 3 waves, and one of those was the Bandit Shrine wave, and it's gone. But in my runs, I'm getting them like 90% of the time, and I've started being a bit more careful in those wave 120 plus runs to not skip any waves. And since then, I have not had a single run that didn't have a Bandit Shrine. So this seems to be true. Here's another example of me doing Bandit Shrines. So here it appears at wave 128. And as I mentioned, it seems to spawn somewhere starting from wave 120, which is where you want to start being careful to not skip waves in case you have a very powerful build. And it's definitely worth, and it's quite easy to kill those goblins because of the cornet pylon. All you have to do is run little circles around the shrine, and the cornet will take care of everything. There is a little bit of a strategy to this though. Again, those hellish machinations that spawn in lunatics, they can quite easily overwhelm you with all the extra stuff spawned from the shrine as well and other waves spawning. So you gotta be a bit careful to kind of like clean up the arena as much as possible around those waves so that you can click the shrine and not be immediately overwhelmed. Because if you get overwhelmed while the Bandit Shrine is active, those goblins will actually despawn and not give you loot. So if you can afford it, you definitely want to try to click the conduit kind of late, because those goblins can spawn as late as something like wave 145, which is usually the time when all your pylons run out and you just, trying to get overwhelmed on purpose so that you can end at wave 150 to get the rewards. So you gotta be a bit careful of that, but sometimes it might just be a bit bad RNG, depending on your build, depending on how well you can do the Echoing Nightmares. You can give up maybe a few goblins once in a while when you get unlucky, but overall those goblins add a lot of extra value, a lot of shards, a lot of gems, a lot of loot, and especially those gem hoarders give you a lot of regular gems that you can use to actually use the Whisper of Atonement that you get to augment your items. So in my case, I've counted this, and from 13 runs, I've got 13 Whisper of Atonements with 125 plus. And I also got enough regular gems for 10 augments just from the Echoing Nightmare itself. So it almost kind of self-sustained the augments that I got from this whole system. If you haven't done it already, make sure you set up your follower with a broken crown, because those regular gems are very valuable and you will need them to actually use those Whisper of Atonements later on, because he's gonna run out of gems otherwise. But I just wanted to highlight this, how good those Goblin Shrines are because of those extra gems. Now, two last things for group players in particular. You have to be a bit careful with those Bandit Shrines, because they can lag out the game heavily if you get a blue goblin. So usually blue goblins are very nice, but if you get them and they split and they drop lots of loot for everyone, it actually lags out the game very easily, apparently. So I've heard of some people, at least in 4-man parties, maybe you don't want to click those Bandit Shrines unless you actually have like a setup where everyone stands right next to the shrine and you have the corner pylon up, and then you can probably just like zap everything down and kind of, ignore the lag by just like trying to run little circles around the Bandit Shrine, just like I do it here in solo. And this will probably solve the issue. But if you are in hardcore, I would be very careful with that. And well, I'm playing SSF right now, so I can't really test this exactly myself, just something to be aware about. And again, like I have shown earlier, you can actually use the gear swapping groups to get a flavor of time into your setup. Or you just start the whole encounter with a flavor of time equipped until the point when you start clicking those shrines and you get double duration on all the pylons, just like in solo. And this is actually quite powerful, and usually for the first like 100 waves or so, you don't really care much about your damage. So you could actually have a flavor of time with like maybe a decent roll equipped, put in another legendary stone there as well, and just blast your first 100 waves or something like this, and then coordinate clicking all the pylons together, and then everyone just swaps to a real amulet like Travelers or Squirts. At least in the early season, when it might be a bit difficult to carry the entire party to wave 150, this might definitely be a bit of a help to get to a few waves higher and closer to the wave 150 goal, until later when it probably doesn't matter that much anymore. And once you reach wave 150, you usually try to get overwhelmed on purpose, which is quite easy to do. So usually just run around in circles or like to the edge of the arena and just go around, and stuff will not really touch you when you have a speed pylon. So you are really fast, you can just run around, and you are usually safe from the meteors, you're usually safe from the enemies, and just kind of chill in the corner somewhere. And this is about it. If you stop killing enemies, it takes literally like 5 seconds or so to get completely overwhelmed in most cases. So that when you are scared, when you have procced on hardcore or something like this, you don't really have to worry very much. Yeah, as you can see, you just run away and it ends in a few seconds. So this is how you want to do that. And that's also it for what I can share here for a bit of advanced Echoing Nightmare farming. So hope this helps you out. We have the Echoing Nightmare tier list on Maxwell. We're probably going to have a meeting this weekend to probably slightly update the tier list and these kind of things, because it was made before the season launch. But overall, things should not really change very much. So our predictions have stayed pretty accurate, I would say, and we might tweak a few things. But other than this is basically how you want to do it. If you want to learn a little bit more, you can also go read up on the mechanics of Echoing Nightmares in more detail in our written guide. I also have another like farming guide for this, explaining more of the basics if you want to see that. And obviously for the Marauder Demon Hunter that I have shown here in this video, we also have some guides, so you can find all that in the description. So I hope this helps you. Hope you like this video. Subscribe for more Diablo content, and I'll see you guys next time.